I'm at NAREIT's headquarters in Washington, and joining us today is Jeremy Banoff, Senior Managing Director with FPO and Associates. Earlier this summer, FPO and NAREIT wrapped up its annual compensation survey. How does this year's survey compare to last year's?
Well, this year is continuing on the tradition. We've had 6 consecutive years of record participation. So what that means, it's highly robust. It's actually the largest survey in the industry. Just to give you some statistics, 113 companies participated. Of those that are publicly traded, 80% approximately of the entire marketplace did it by total capitalization. And the survey goes over 100 positions deep. We crossed that threshold for the first time. So it's very robust. We have a lot of questions on benefits this year. Every other year we do that. And of course, the plethora of questions on structures of compensation programs and design and all the stuff you'd expect to get. So it goes extremely deep, record participation, truly the survey to have across the industry.
There's a lot of focus on compensation these days, particularly in the public industry with say on pay. How has that impacted compensation decisions, and how would you say REITs fit in?
Well, REITs have actually performed quite well in terms of say on pay with voting outcomes and performing scoring-wise better for votes versus against votes as other industries. So that's a good news. Truthfully, it wasn't a perfect season. There were a handful of REITs that did fail. But that being said, I would tell you that companies are being a lot more thoughtful in the process. There's consequences now, and while say on pay isn't binding per se, so if you actually fail a vote, you don't have to necessarily change your program. It's a non-binding decision, but you must address why you took the vote into consideration. So I think that's causing a lot of companies in the boardroom to spend a lot more time dealing with compensation issues, thinking about performance year over year, and really being thoughtful in terms of was it a good year, was it not so good year, how's our performance on an absolute basis, on a relative basis compared to others, and really putting it into context.
FPO recently completed its 10th annual proprietary analysis of compensation at REITs and had some interesting findings, particularly with respect to pay for performance. Can you share with us some of the results?
Sure. What we found actually for one of the first times, just about half, 49 companies out of our top 100 REITs that we analyzed as part of this analysis, and we looked all over compensation programs, executive and board, use multi-year programs in some way, shape, or form. And what that means is that companies aren't just looking at performance on a year-to-year basis, but sustaining that performance, and typically that's over a 3-year basis. In addition, when you look at the companies that were the top quartile performers, defined by total shareholder return, versus those that were at the bottom quartile performance, you actually saw the top quartile performers pay 5 times higher than the bottom quartile performers. So that shows you that there is a sort of alignment, if you will. Furthermore, I would tell you that total shareholder return was the most commonly used metric, which is positive for shareholders. And also, if you go back to the NAREIT compensation survey, there was a question in there too that mentioned the fact that 79% of companies rated their performance at a high level, overall financial performance is better than the previous year, and 82% of companies had an increase in their overall compensation expense, nearly matching that. So you can tell that when times are good, and those that have outperformed, they're getting paid higher than those that haven't. And that's a positive sign from a corporate governance perspective and industry-wide.
In light of your vast direct client experience and serving more than a quarter of the REIT universe, could you shed some insights as to what you're observing in the boardrooms regarding compensation matters?
One thing that'd be interesting is that if you go back kind of 5 years ago and you kind of look at today and what's really changed, I tell you that the meeting times are certainly longer, and for those people that are involved, whether executives or directors watching this, they would certainly nod their heads yes. And people are really looking at performance within context. Again, it's not so much just about how we did last year, but how does this compare to the prior 3-year period, prior 5-year period? And also, again, balancing the absolute and relative performance. So it's not just, did we do well, but how do we do in relation to others? There's also a lot more discussions around strategies. Strategies are being evaluated, particularly since the downturn. And so what are the right motivational metrics, and what are we trying to accomplish going forward? Not just on a 1-year basis, could be a 3-year basis, could be a 5-year basis. And how are we tracking along what we set out to do? And so I would definitely say that the meetings are longer, but at the same time, there's a lot more diligence being applied, and it's a very interactive conversation.
Are there any legislative items on the horizon that companies should be aware of?
Well, certainly there were a number that were discussed about earlier this year, and it looks like now where we are, the SEC came out at the very beginning of the year and mentioned that they're going to finalize clawbacks. That's probably the biggest item as relates to Dodd-Frank. However, they have yet to do that, and now the discussion is that it's not going to be in place for this year's upcoming proxy season, but possibly the following years. That's probably the biggest one overall. There are a number of other initiatives too that are being dealt with, but I would say that that's first and foremost. And also the proxy advisory firms with Say on Pay, ISS gets a lot of notoriety out there, and Glass Lewis as well. They come out with their revised standards, and typically once they deem a compensation policy a poor pay practice, companies will take notes. Not necessarily you need to change them overnight, but it kind of gives you a directional sense of what they're looking for going forward from best practices perspectives, and how they'll advise their institutional shareholders, which in the REIT industry is particularly important since shareholder bases are so heavy institutional base versus the retail shareholder, so to speak.
Great, thanks for joining us, Jeremy. For more information on the compensation survey, visit REIT.com.